Welcome to another episode of Mexico in the Kitchen. Today I'm trying a recipe I've seen many times. I've never done it myself, but I've had them a few times. They're really nice, really crispy, sweet. So we're making Buñuelos de viento. I don't think this is a Mexican recipe, although we do them a lot there. I couldn't find exactly where this is from. It has origins from maybe Middle East, maybe some other places. It just became a mix everywhere. And now I was walking in a flea market here in Finland, and I found this iron, which is very similar to the one we use. The shape is a bit different, and also it has some other heads that you can exchange, and you can use many of these. I think these were a thing here on the 50s, 60s. Nowadays, they're not so common anymore. Younger people have told me they haven't seen those, but older people here in Finland have told, like, yeah, when I was a kid, I remember my family making them. So we're going to try both recipes because we also found an old recipe in an old book. So we're going to try the Mexican way, we're going to try the Finnish way, we're going to compare them and taste them, of course. So I hope you like it. Press like, subscribe, activate the bell, share it with your friends, all those kind of things, and let's go at it.
First, I'm starting with the Finnish recipe. This recipe is very simple, there's not a lot of ingredients, there's not a lot of steps involved. We're just going to take a bowl and we're adding all of our ingredients. I'm starting with 40 grams of flour, 1 tablespoon of sugar, 1 whole egg, and 75 milliliters of milk. Once we have all the ingredients in the bowl, we can either use a whisk, or if you have a hand mixer, you can also use that. This mix is extremely simple, it's going to be quite liquid, so don't expect the kind of dough that you can knead or handle with your hands. It's mostly a liquid mix, and all we need to do is make sure there's no lumps. This is the end result. As I said, it looks quite liquid, but don't worry about it, that's exactly what we need for our iron to get coated, and then we can deep fry it. Once our dough is ready, we can start making our buñuelos. For that, we need some oil. Here I have a pot with some canola oil. It's on a 3 or 4 out of 6, so medium-high fire. While I was looking for these recipes, I noticed that a lot of people skip this step, and this is a very important one. If you skip this step, you might get 1 or 2 right at some point, but you will make a mess. You will use a lot of the dough, and it's just in general very hard. This just makes the whole process way easier. Our oil is ready and our iron should be ready as well. I'm going to take it out, I'm going to shake the excess oil, and I'm just going to put it right into our dough. If your iron is hot enough, you will hear this. Make sure you don't cover it all the way up, otherwise it will never come off. All we have to do now is put it into the oil and wait. This process is really quick. You will notice the first one might not come off by itself. The second, third, fourth, they will just come out right away. Since this is the first one I make, you can see it's completely stuck to the iron. In this case, it's not very hard to get it off. You just need to take a knife or a fork and help it come off easily. For that, I have this pot with a strainer. Some people like using paper on a plate for this kind of thing, but I think it just makes the paper stick to your food, and also it makes it kind of soggy. So I think this is way better. Just let the excess fat drip and just let them be there. As you can see, the iron is clean and we can repeat the process many times. Make sure to keep the iron for a few seconds on the oil to make it warm, and then you can repeat the process, otherwise it might not stick as well. I want to show you how thin these are. These are extremely light. Once you bite into them, they completely disappear in your mouth. They're really nice, they have a good flavor, and they're extremely crispy. I'm going to show you the second one that came off by itself. So it's very simple, you just need something to fish it out of the oil and then set it again into the strainer. If you live in a bit warmer place, you might want to put the mix into the fridge for a bit just before doing all this. And also, at some point the iron will warm up the mix. So if you take a break, put it into the fridge for a bit, then you will continue as normally. It helps a lot. This is the end result, and while they might not look as the prettiest, the flavor was still good. Usually they will use some powdered sugar, they will just sprinkle it on top, I guess to make them look prettier. And they also eat them with some jam and some whipped cream. I think the dough being so simple makes it hard to cook them evenly. Overall, I think the recipe is great, especially considering the few ingredients they had available at the time, and the flavor is still quite good. The Mexican recipe for Buñuelos de viento has way more ingredients. It's a bit more complex, but it's also very easy to do. This recipe makes around 80 pieces, so if you don't feel like having that many, feel free to cut it in half. I will start with 225 grams of flour. I will add 2 tablespoons of sugar, half a teaspoon of baking powder, about 1 teaspoon of salt. Once I have added all the dry ingredients, I'm going to mix everything a bit, and then I'm going to continue adding the rest. Then I will add the 2 eggs. I'm going to add the 375 milliliters of milk. I'm going to add the melted butter, and I'm going to mix everything. Just like with the other recipe, this mix has to be quite runny. So we're just going to mix everything. You can use a whisk, you can use a hand mixer or a stand mixer, whatever you prefer. The recipe calls for 60 milliliters of water, but it also asks to be cautious. So if your mix is already too liquid, you might skip it completely, or you might add the whole thing. You might also use only half of it. This is completely up to you. In my case, I used the 60 milliliters because it was runny and it looked exactly like the mix I had done for the last recipe, so I was quite confident. If you are not sure, I would recommend you try your mix first. If it works, then you are set. If you think your mix is a bit too thick, then you can of course use a bit more water. The recipe calls for vanilla extract. This is one I bought here in Finland, and this is one I got from a Mexican store. This is how it usually looks in Mexico. It doesn't really matter which one you use, because they're both vanilla, but because this is a Mexican recipe, I'll go with the Mexican one. All we have to do now is mix the vanilla into our mix, and we're all set. If you live in Finland, I usually get my stuff from Las Tunas do Refai. I'll leave the link in the description. If you live somewhere else, I'm sure you can get all these kind of ingredients from a local Mexican market or Mexican store, or there's someone online that will deliver this to wherever you are. Once we have mixed everything together, we can go to the stove. The process is exactly the same. My oil is hot already. I have my iron in the oil for a bit just so it gets hot. I'm going to shake the excess oil. I'm going to dip it into my dough. Make sure you see that bubbling, you hear the sizzling. That means the dough is sticking to our iron. We have to give it some time, be patient. We dip it into our oil. As I said before, some of these get completely off the iron by themselves, but usually the first few might stick to the iron. Because this dough uses the baking powder and other ingredients, you will notice it gets very crispy. It makes these kind of bubbles. It's definitely crunchy. In this case, I had to use a fork just to slide it off the iron, and then we can continue, repeat the process over and over. For the finished version, we used some powdered sugar. In this case, I'm using regular sugar and I'm adding some cinnamon. I'm going to make a mix. The exact amount of sugar and cinnamon is completely up to you. I try not to go too crazy with the cinnamon because it might become a bit too spicy or a bit too strong of a flavor for some people, but you will find the balance very easily. Just mix them together, try a bit, and you should get a cinnamon taste without it being too powerful. Once our sugar with cinnamon is ready, the process is very simple. We just take one buñuelo, we just throw it into the sugar, press it a bit, make sure the sugar covers it completely, take it out and set it on a plate. These buñuelos are a bit greasy, but you still want to do this process kind of soon after you made them, so the sugar and the cinnamon stick nicely. I can tell you with the cinnamon and the sugar, these are a bit messy to eat, but they're definitely delicious. This is the end result for the Mexican version, and I don't know what you think, but I think they're very Christmassy. They look great on a plate, so it's just definitely something that will stand out when you take it to a Christmas table or just for a gathering with friends. They're very crunchy, very crispy, delicious. They just kind of melt on your mouth. I think it's a great dessert.
This is how I made the Finnish Rosetti. These are quite nice. They taste really good. They don't have much of a flavor on their own, but neither do the Buñuelos de viento. They're a bit of a very simple recipe because at that time there was not many ingredients available in Finland, and that's why probably they were such a simple recipe. It still works pretty well if you add something else. I like the powdered sugar because it makes it look Christmassy, but I would probably go with the cinnamon and sugar or maybe some syrup on top, but they're quite nice. Then I made the Buñuelos de viento. These ones were really nice. It reminds me of a churro. It tastes very similar. It's just missing a bit of the softer texture inside. These are just completely crispy, and I really like the cinnamon and sugar coating. Again, I would also maybe make some syrup if you want something extra, but you can just have them as they are. Really good. After doing both recipes, I think the Mexican one is a bit easier. It just made it easier to get them to the right spot where they wouldn't burn. I think with the Finnish one, maybe you have a bit more of a sensitive to temperature and just to the timing that you use. So that's probably the main reason why I would choose the Mexican one. But they were both great, especially if you put something on top, have them with maybe some jam, as you do with the Finnish ones. But I hope you liked it. Press like, subscribe, activate the bell, share with your friends, try it at home, and see you in the next one.